Okay, so you know how sometimes like the most familiar Bible stories, they can just like, I don't know, they can take on a whole new meaning when you really like dig in, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what we're doing today, like a serious deep dive into the story of Peter.
Yeah.
Like specifically that whole, upon this rock I will build my church deal.
It's one of those passages, right, that seems, I don't know, so simple on the surface.
Right.
But it's actually sparked centuries of debate and interpretation.
Exactly. And to like help us unpack all of that, we've got excerpts from a talk by Steve Ray, who, fun fact, was actually a Baptist minister.
Oh, wow.
Before converting to Catholicism.
Interesting.
So talk about a unique perspective, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, he takes us straight to this place that I bet most people have never even heard of, Caesarea Philippi. And it turns out it was like the place for pagan worship back in Jesus's time.
Oh, absolutely. It was a site of like massive symbolic weight. Like picture this, right? A gigantic rock formation. People back then, they believed it was the gates of hell. And they built a temple to Caesar Augustus right on top of it.
Oh, wow. Talk about like adding insult to injury, right? They literally like planted a monument to Roman power on top of what they thought was a gateway to the underworld.
It's wild.
It's like, I don't know. But like, what's so interesting is that Jesus didn't shy away from that. Like all that clash of ideologies, you know, he like leaned right into it.
Exactly. And that's where it gets super interesting because it's right there in the shadow of that pagan temple, like amidst all this talk of false gods and Roman power, that Jesus makes this like really dramatic declaration about building his church on Peter the rock.
Oh, it's like he's drawing a line in the sand, or should I say like a line in the rock right there.
Literally, yeah.
So he's saying, forget that fake rock over there with all its phony gods and emperors. This right here, this is where the true power is.
Mm-hmm.
That's bold.
It is.
It sends a really powerful message.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a direct challenge to like the whole established order. You know, it's like a proclamation that Jesus is founding his kingdom on something totally different, something unshakable. And you have to remember, right, like acknowledging Caesar as a god back then wasn't optional.
Oh, yeah.
It was often a matter of life or death. So for Jesus to just come out and say this in that specific spot,
Yeah.
revolutionary.
It makes the whole thing even more intense when you really think about it, right?
Sure.
You've got this like imposing natural feature that everyone thinks is a gateway to the underworld.
Right.
Then you've got this, I don't know, this gleaming temple to a human emperor who's claiming to be a god, and then boom, Jesus.
It's like he's deliberately replacing these old, flawed ideas.
Right.
Something new, something infinitely more hopeful. And the kicker is he's entrusting this whole new order to Peter.
And it's important to remember, too, that like Ray, he really emphasizes this point. It's not about Peter being like this perfect guy or anything. Yeah. He was known to, you know, he messed up, he doubted, he even denied knowing Jesus at one point.
Yeah.
But it's precisely this seemingly flawed human that Jesus chooses.
Exactly.
Because it's not about Peter himself, right? It's about the authority that Jesus gives to him.
Yeah.
It's about establishing something much bigger, something that's going to last.
Right. It's not about like Peter's, you know, personal qualities.
Right.
It's about Jesus establishing like this lineage, this chain of authority that goes beyond just one person.
Right.
Even someone as close to him as Peter.
That's a really good point. It's like he's saying, this isn't just about you, Peter.
Yeah.
This is about something way bigger that I'm starting here. And then that's where those keys to the kingdom come in.
Right.
I always heard that was about like the gospel message, you know, share the gospel, you unlock the kingdom for people.
Yeah.
But Steve, he kind of throws a curveball in there.
He does, and it's a great example of how, like, when you get the historical context,
Yeah.
it can totally change how you see something.
Okay. So in the ancient world, right, keys, especially keys that a king give you,
Yep.
they weren't just about, you know, opening a door.
Right, right.
They meant something way bigger.
Okay.
Authority, dominion, that kind of thing.
So it's not just about getting into the kingdom.
Right.
It's about having the power to make decisions in the kingdom.
Exactly.
To act for the king.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Like imagine, right, a royal steward,
Okay.
and they've got the keys to the kingdom because the king's away.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who get to manage everything, make decisions on the king's behalf.
So basically with Peter, it's like Jesus is saying, all right, I'm going back to my father now.
Yeah.
But you're in charge down here. You've got the keys now. Take care of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a huge responsibility.
It is. It is. And then this is where that connection to the Pope comes in.
Yeah.
At least for Catholics.
At least in the Catholic tradition.
The idea being that Jesus goes back up to heaven.
Right.
And he basically makes Peter his steward here on earth.
Gives him the authority to, guide and govern the church. What about that whole binding and loosing thing, though? What does that even mean?
Yeah, that's another phrase that can sound kind of mysterious.
Oh, sure.
If you don't know the historical background.
Right.
Basically, binding and loosing, it was all about making official decisions.
Okay.
Especially when it came to Jewish law and all that. So Jesus giving Peter the power to bind and loose is saying, you have the authority to decide what's allowed and what's not in the church.
So it's like a direct line of authority there.
Yeah.
What Peter decides on earth, that's how it is in heaven too.
That's the idea. And this is where it gets really interesting for Catholics.
Yeah.
Because they believe this power gets passed down through the Pope.
Oh, okay.
Who they see as inheriting that authority straight from Peter.
Wow. Okay, so we've gone from a rock to keys to this whole binding and loosing thing.
It's all connected.
Yeah, it's like each image adds to the last one.
Exactly.
And it all builds this idea of leadership in the church.
Yeah.
But I got to ask, though, this whole concept of passing down leadership, it didn't just come out of nowhere, did it?
You're exactly right. And Ray really drives this home, this tradition.
Yeah.
It's got roots in Jewish tradition that go way back, even further than Jesus.
Okay.
He brings up the whole chair of Moses thing.
Okay.
Which, by the way, wasn't a literal chair, It was more like a symbol.
I was picturing like a big throne.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But it wasn't about that.
Right.
It was about having the authority to interpret and teach the law.
Okay.
The law that was passed down from Moses to all the religious leaders who came after him.
Okay, so even before Jesus, right, you've got this whole idea already of like leadership being passed down to keep the beliefs going. And Jesus uses that.
Yeah.
But he takes it even further.
Exactly. It's like he's building on what's already there.
Right.
But adding this like whole new level of authority to it.
Okay. And then that brings us to like the Pope and the church today.
Right.
Right.
Ray uses this analogy of a ship.
Yeah.
The ship is the Catholic Church, and then there's all these rafts. And the rafts are like all the other denominations.
Yeah, I've heard that one before.
Yeah, it can be a little, I don't know.
It can rub some people the wrong way.
Yeah, especially if you're not Catholic.
Yeah, for sure.
But even if you don't love the analogy, it's helpful to see where he's coming from.
Right. It's about understanding his perspective.
Exactly. So he sees the church as this really, I don't know, solid, dependable structure.
Right.
Like it's built to get through tough times and guide people to where they need to go. The rafts, though, they might give you some freedom, let you explore on your own a bit.
Yeah.
But they don't have that same, like, stability.
Right. They're a little more,
Direction.
Yeah, exactly.
So he sees the church as kind of this guiding light, a source of truth when everything else seems so chaotic.
It makes sense.
The church makes mistakes too, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, what about this whole infallibility thing? How does that even work?
Yeah, that's got to be like the most misunderstood thing about Catholicism.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, it doesn't mean the Pope is perfect.
Right.
Or that he never messes up. He's human, like everyone else.
Right.
It's more about protecting the church from teaching something that goes against what Jesus actually taught.
So it's more like a safeguard.
Yeah.
To make sure the core beliefs stay intact.
Exactly. Like a spiritual safety net, It doesn't mean the Pope's right about everything.
Right.
But when he speaks officially about faith and stuff, there's that extra layer of protection there.
Okay, so it's about avoiding big errors in what the church teaches.
Right.
Not that the Pope is like all-knowing or something.
Exactly.
But then there's, the reality of the church, the good and the bad, all of it.
For sure.
Like what about things like the sex abuse scandal?
Yeah.
It's hard to make that fit with this idea of the church being this perfect, infallible institution.
Yeah, you're right. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's painful. And to Ray's credit, he doesn't avoid it.
Yeah.
He talks about how awful the abuse was.
Right.
And how the church messed up, not protecting people. But he also says something really important.
What's that?
Just because people within the church do terrible things.
Yeah.
Even people in charge.
Right.
It doesn't change the truth of the faith itself.
So the idea is the church as a whole can still be a force for good.
Exactly.
Even if some of its members have done horrible things.
And Ray would say, the fact that the church is willing to face these issues, to try to heal things, to change, That actually shows how strong it is.
Okay.
And how committed it is to the truth.
It's like, it's not about never messing up.
Right.
It's about what you do when you do mess up.
Exactly. And for a lot of people, how the church responds to this.
Yeah.
That's what'll really show if it's credible or not.
Totally. But for Ray,
Mm-hmm.
and for a lot of Catholics, the church's identity, it's not about its failures.
Mm-hmm.
It's about that commitment to Christ
Right.
and what he taught.
It's a message of hope, forgiveness,
Right.
redemption, even when things are really messed up.
When you put it like that,
Yeah.
it's hard to argue with how powerful that message is.
It really is. And, whether you agree with everything Ray says or not,
Yeah.
he reminds us that faith, it's not about just blindly believing.
Right.
It's about really thinking about these tough questions.
Wrestling with them
Exactly.
and figuring out your own path,
Within this whole, tapestry of belief.
Yeah, and sometimes those paths,
Mm-hmm.
they take us to places we didn't expect.
Yeah.
They make us question what we thought we knew.
Absolutely.
And we come out of it understanding things in a deeper way.
that's the journey,
That's
right?
the journey. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Peter,
Mm-hmm.
the rock, the keys, and what it all means for the church today,
Yeah.
here's something to think about. What is it for you that makes you trust something? A person, an institution, a certain set of beliefs, and how do those things hold up
Yeah.
when you really look at them closely?
Especially
in a world where truth can feel pretty hard to find.
for sure. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for being here.